My name's Megan, and I was a strawberry shortcake fan. Dating myself.
I'm Benjamin Struett. I would have to say probably basketball, because that's what I spent the most time with. So definitely a sport.
Stefan, Legos for sure. Still playing with Legos. My boys.
Diane, Barbies. Barbie girl.
Come over to Michelle.
Yeah.
With this
Michelle, and I'm between Barbies and Legos. Spent a lot of time at the Barbie Dream House, my friend's house. We were just talking about Legos the other day though, but still love to play.
Yes. Come on over.
It's so great.
Oh, Lisa.
Both of you guys, go ahead.
I
Favorite
don't know.
toy as a child?
Wood.
Like whittling?
Lisa, coming in out of nowhere with wood.
You know.
What'd you do with wood?
Lisa, were you a whittler?
Nice.
Huh?
A whittler? Like, did you whittle wood?
No, I don't
No?
whittle. I just made stuff. I put wood together.
Oh,
Made
okay,
stuff.
like carpentry. Got it. Alright, well, that's even cooler. Zach?
I wasn't very good at it, but I used to try to do the etch a sketch.
Have you met Leslie?
A lot of
Yeah.
failed attempts.
Have you met Leslie? She can do the.
Very
those
good,
things.
also.
I'm Mark and Big Wheels. This first.
What's big wheels? Oh, no. Sorry, guys.
It's like
Either you're dating us
three,
being millennial.
like a tricycle where the front wheel was like huge. And you would sit, you're sitting like almost on the ground,
Oh, yeah.
pedaling. You had to pedal really fast to just basically move.
Yeah.
He's like,
It's
"Oh,
sort of like spin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not
And
very
then
efficient.
slam on the brake and slide.
Yes.
I'm Laura, and mine was probably Barbie's.
Favorite toy as a child? And your name?
I'm Johanna. My favorite toy was probably My Little Pony.
Okay, I already went to wait.
I'll wait Cunningham, G.I. Joe's.
Carrie, and I liked to play school. Set up the stuffed animals.
Marissa, anybody remember Puffalumps? Probably,
No.
maybe those or My Little Pony.
Chris, it would be a tie between like flipping my bike upside down and like putting a card in it, you know?
Yes.
Or like, Pong. I was like
Ooh.
doing Pong a lot.
Yeah, those were good. Natalie Clayton, I'd probably say basketball too. I hooped a lot.
Jenny Bliss, favorite toy as a child?
Yeah, we played school or house. We always played house. So Barbies. Yeah.
Did we miss anyone?
Is everybody ready?
Yeah, Steve's coming in. Steve, what was your favorite toy as a child? What was your favorite toy as a child? What agree?
Legos.
Legos? Good choice.
Popular answer. Morning, everybody. Apologies to Laura and Jenny, because probably about 60% of this they've heard. But see you guys. We're going to talk about one aspect of sales in this industry. I think sales is an accurate word to use in this industry, but when somebody says, "Are you in sales?" what do you say?
No.
No, right? What industry are you in?
Customer service.
Yeah, I think our industry is a service industry. So I'm using the word sales a couple times, but I think there are some things in common with what we do in sales, right? But one specific aspect of what we do is really, I think, the make or break of the long-term success of realtors. And it's how you go about gaining business. So is anybody familiar with the name Stephen Levitt? He's an economist, University of Chicago. He's the Freakonomics author. He wrote a book, well, he's written several books, but one of his books, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. It had a chapter he performed a study that measured where realtors invest the majority of their time and money. What do you think the final synopsis of that was? Where do realtors spend more time and money than they do anywhere else?
Lead generation.
Yeah, lead generation. Sorry, I didn't specify. Within their business, where do they spend the most time and money? Yeah. And it wasn't even close. One of the things that he attempted to calculate in the study, which some consumers really pushed back on when they read this, he calculated the average dollar per hour a realtor makes if you exclude the time they spend generating leads. So from a consumer's mindset, right? I don't care how much time you spend generating business. I care how much time you spent doing what, right? Helping me. And the numbers, like, honestly, they didn't look very good. Now, I found the study to, like, I couldn't jive it with my reality in the industry. The amount of time that his research indicated that realtors spent generating business was hard for me to understand. I couldn't feel like, what are you doing for that amount of time? But nonetheless, I think it is fair to say that realtors spend a ton of time and money generating business. Because honestly, like, for better or worse, it is the main driver of whether people stay in the industry for a long time. If y'all haven't figured this out yet, being really good at what you do is not the best predictor for whether you stay in the industry long term. I think it can lead to generating business, which is the better predictor of staying in the industry. How many of you have encountered an agent that's been in the business for 20 years that you think was terrible? And those of you that aren't raising your hands, you will next year when we ask you that question. And you think to yourself, what? How is this person, and then you, how many of you have looked up their numbers?
How in the world did they do
Yeah,
that?
not only how have they been in the business this long, but like, and so let's just acknowledge the reality that they aren't necessarily directly tied. I am going to talk about that. I do believe they can be, but I think you just have to kind of acknowledge that and just, it's the reality, right? Lead generation trumps being good at what you do in terms of predicting how long you'll be in the industry, okay? And realtors spend a lot of time and money doing it. Okay, one note here before we get started on the brainstorm. There are hundreds of ways that realtors go about building their business. My goal today is not to set up a better and worse or a right and wrong dichotomy of that, but a couple of the things that I share I think could be interpreted as though he's saying this is the right way to do it and this is the wrong way to do it. That's not my goal. It's gonna seem like that in a couple moments. And the reason I think it might seem like that is I do think a big chunk of our industry assumes there is this prescribed way to build business and misses out on what I have found personally to be the most beneficial way of building business. And so if I think our industry is generally missing making a mistake in the best ways to build, then I'm gonna be talking about, like, yeah, I get it. I think a couple different ways that people go about building business, they can work, and they're not wrong. They're not worse, but they're the norm. And so there is a narrative that, like, this is how you do it. And then I think in reality, if you talk to the most successful people in our marketplace, you realize, like, wait a minute. Actually, very few of them are building their business in that way. Why is that the concentrated conversation about lead generation, okay? So I'm gonna try to set this up saying, like, people don't give enough attention to these things. Not that they're better necessarily, but they're overlooked, okay? However you find success in building business, whatever works for you is gonna be the way you should do this. And so that you know, I mean, we have successful realtors here in the company, that if you compared their lead generation strategies, they're very, very different. And that's in one company that tends to do things actually kind of like itself. So in the industry, there's a very wide spectrum, okay? Is that enough of a disclaimer that I'm not going to offend someone by, I might still offend someone, that's fine, but, okay. So I want you to brainstorm with me. Shout out, this isn't necessarily something that you've done, but what are ways that realtors build business in this industry? Okay?
Referrals.
Who are they cold calling?
By owners, expireds.
Yep. What else? Somebody else said something.
Your sphere.
Open houses.
Good customer service.
Can I put that here?
Yeah.
Strategic partnerships.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I mean, with, someplace big enough to have, incoming or outgoing, reloads. I've got some with some banks that's actually sent business to me. There's various places those can take you.
Yep. Steven mentioned this. Not dissimilar from this, it's just kind of a formal version of this, right? It's a pretty good list. What else is missing?
Active in your community, maybe, like running organizations, I guess that's on there, but.
Yeah.
Direct mail.
Social.
I think I heard somebody say this, right?
I think education, like knowledge, if you know the area really well, you can speak for yourself.
Networking.
Why isn't anyone saying grocery cards?
Actually, Trisha's at Kroger.
She does. Or she's on the,
Into the card.
whatever you call that.
Placard thing, yeah.
Yeah.
She
on the
said that
grocery
she's
cart.
been having parents from her kids' school go, I didn't know you were a realtor. And I was like,
Perfect.
and that's
Why
why
she
you're
does
at
it.
Kroger. That's great.
Perfect.
Brokerage leads.
Listings.
Sure.
Not too dissimilar from this. Definitely a big strategy for a lot of realtors. Wonder why in the world did they list that house at that price? They know that's not going to sell. Right. They just got to sign in a good yard for 6 months. And you feel like some big category is missing?
Maybe telling your story, I heard that a lot, and people just, in the conversations,
Yeah.
informal conversations.
Yep, so kind of like a subcategory of this maybe, within your sphere, I assume you mean?
Maybe events.
Cool. Okay. Feel like that's a pretty good list. Maybe I wanna where it's gonna get hard to argue that I'm not saying there's better and worse. But help me put these on this spectrum. Okay? I could have flipped it, so the cold was on top to make sure you didn't know that. But, anybody gonna disagree with me here? Okay.
Direct mail.
Direct mail is probably there. Why am I hesitating on direct mail? On where it goes in the spectrum?
Cause you could be mailing people that you know or have a relationship with.
Yes. Put it there.
While you're holding on. Oh, sorry.
Referrals are good tough.
Yep. I might put repeat just barely above it, but yes.
I feel like social media belongs somewhere in the middle.
Is this satisfactory?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Brokerage leads are cool. Ish.
I'm gonna put them somewhere around mail. Okay,
Zillow leads are further down.
maybe here. Okay. This here. How about farming somewhere in between direct mailer and social, particularly if you live in that neighborhood? Relocation, probably here. Open house? Probably somewhere in this neighborhood, right? Pretty similar. I'm actually gonna say having a listing probably there. That's great. We could put that in the farming category, grocery carts probably, depending on where you buy them.
I'd say like community involvement under sphere.
Okay. Grace, I like what you said about expertise. It is kind of like farming, but it probably is a more human, like, oriented. Is that fair?
The partnerships are pretty strong. Right, personal, maybe, more personal.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, they're really this. It's maybe just a slightly more formal version,
Right.
right, of that, particularly if it's a small partner. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone want to object to anything on that list? You're welcome to argue that I put something in the wrong place. Okay. Now, if realtors spend a big chunk of their time and money, and this, I mean, I'll find this and email it out to the brokerage, see if I can find a version you can read online of this chapter. I mean, if I remember right, it was something like 65% of their time. Didn't really make us look good as a profession. But if they spend a bunch of their time and money doing these things, honest opinion, do you think realtors spend more time on one end of that spectrum, just in general, industry-wide?
Yes.
You think so?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's hard to measure, because you can come up with examples of people that don't spend any time on this half of the spectrum, right? But in general, I think that's true, that if you measure the time, people spend more time on this end of the spectrum, okay? Why?
Well, they don't
Why do you-
have, they don't have the other things.
They don't?
If you're saying if they spend more time on the bottom half of it?
Yeah.
Well, it's because they, you know, they might be, maybe they just moved into town last year. You know, maybe they haven't developed those things in town to be able to use those.
Okay, that's good. That would be one reason. You can generate these faster, right? Okay. Why else do they spend more time there?
Maybe people don't like and trust them.
Like the hot take of the morning right there. Is she lying? No?
Truth hurts.
Yeah. You see what she's saying?
Yeah.
This requires so much more relational capital that you may not have, possibly because you're new in a community, possibly because you burnt it. Okay, true. Those are both very good reasons. Why else would you spend more time here?
It's just a bigger group of people.
It feels like it has a higher capacity on the surface, right?
Immediate feedback,
Say that again?
immediate feedback,
Yes.
easily measurable.
The ability to measure it in the short run. How quickly do you know if calling an expired listing worked? Instantly, right? How quickly do you know if calling 300 expired listings worked? Right when you're done, right? Y'all know that's a thing for human beings. This is a part of the human condition, is that we have to discipline ourselves to take the long-term payout. I mean, you name it, right? We do this in relationships. Like, this is just a part of how we are as humans, is that it is more natural for us to invest time and energy in something that we know right away if it worked. So then, how crowded does this get? Very. Have any of you ever had a seller, like, where a client of yours, or maybe just someone that you knew, had a listing that expired?
Yes.
What happens?
They get called 20 times a day.
Yeah. What? I mean, I had a seller, like, what the hell's happening? Why are all these realtors calling me? Somebody here, was it one of you? Somebody here at the brokerage had a property that they owned that they let expire. And like, of course, the people that are doing this as a system didn't know that they were calling the realtor, who wasn't the seller. Okay, so it was none of you. I can't
It
remember
happened
who
to
this
an
was.
agent in town. She like made a big post about it.
Oh, really?
Cause
Yeah.
it was like, maybe it was only in her husband's name, but, or something, but she had like, she was complaining about how terrible people are.
Yeah, something like that just happened.
Oh,
I
it was
mean,
Dodie Muscari.
Oh, Dodie, yeah.
She made a big thing about it.
Okay, so a similar thing happened to somebody here recently. It was like an LLC name, maybe, that people, you can buy the phone number associated with the LLC, and it was going to the owner, it was the realtor who's here. So, okay, I think it's worth noting, like, even people that aren't investing here, you still have the tendency to invest your time and your money in things that are easily measurable and that have a quick, not necessarily return, but you know quickly if it's working, right? Now, I said I'm not gonna set up a better and worse or a right and wrong, but I would make the case that as a business owner, it is your goal to put yourself into positions where you have a competitive advantage. That is, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. As a business owner, if you can put yourself in front of a consumer with who you have a competitive advantage, that's good business development. I looked up the definition of competitive advantage. Condition or circumstance that puts a company, in this case you, the business owner, puts a person in a favorable or superior business position. Okay, so if that's good business practice, you all see that this spectrum is exactly the same as how much of a competitive advantage you have as a realtor in comparison to competition. So, like, our industry can be pretty competitive, right? If someone is choosing you, whether they actually thought about choosing someone else, if they're choosing you to work with, they chose not to work with other people, right? Fair? They knew they had other options. They chose you for some reason. All sorts of reasons why. You can put yourself into positions where you have essentially no competitive advantage. You just happen to be the person talking to that consumer, right? That's down here. And you know how many realtors are they probably talking to? A lot, 20 a day, maybe, if they're answering their phone. And I think in general, if your business development strategy is relying on situations where you don't have a competitive advantage, that's not a good business development strategy. So this is where it starts to sound better and worse. Can this work?
Yes.
100%. There's a reason that, I mean, jump on YouTube, right? Search real estate lead generation training, and you're gonna find all the videos that you want. And there's a reason that this model is replicated over and over and over again. How does it work? What makes this side of lead generation work?
Volume.
Yeah, exactly. Volume of what? Volume of time?
Transactions.
Yeah, transactions. Could be money, right? Like, this is probably more money than time. This is probably more money than time. They both involve some time. These are probably no money. You buy the list, maybe you buy the phone numbers, but it's heavy on time. But you see what Wade's saying there. If you have zero competitive advantage, you're still going to be able to get some of that business if the volume is high enough, right? This is why time and money becomes such a big investment. My goal isn't to say don't do this. It's to say if you do this, do it eyes wide open. Do it knowing that you're choosing this over this. Because I think most people choosing this aren't choosing it eyes wide open. They feel like they don't have a choice, right? Because this is what they see. You follow me on that? So if you choose it eyes wide open, great. And there is a realtor here in Indianapolis that spends $1 million a year. Cheers. So if you want like the example all the way on that one end of the volume spectrum, right? And would he continue spending $1 million a year if he hadn't figured out how to make that work? No, I would hope he wouldn't. I doubt. So you could go, there is a long spectrum of volume to try to make this work, and it very well might be the right fit for you, but do it intentionally by thinking about, wait a minute, what's consistent with who I am and what I'm going to be good at? What type of business do I want to do? And am I willing to take a bit longer term payoff in my investment of time and money? Here's my thesis, is that most realtors, if they really understood how business development worked in the long run, and thought like really intent, who am I, what am I gonna be good at? I think most realtors would spend more time and money here than they do, and less time and money here. So not better or worse, I think misaligned. Follow me on that? So that's why I would encourage people to spend more time here, because I don't see them doing it. Okay, I'm about to pivot, but before I do, comments on this, questions?
It reminds me a lot of fundraising where we would mail out 100,000 letters,
Yeah.
hoping to get a 1% return. And then you had your major gift officers at the top who had a list of like 100 people that they would target for really one-on-one conversations in order to get, you know, $10, $50, $100,000 gifts out of them versus the direct mail at like $25 a pop. It's kind of interesting to see the connection on the scale.
That's a really good, it is a very good parallel.
And direct mail is really expensive. Spend a lot of money mailing.
Mhm. Which fundraising strategy works?
FFA, for example, one-on-one major gift officers, they're the ones that got the $1 million gifts out of John Deere, Monsanto, shame on all of them. But then I managed our direct mail program, and we were lucky to get a 1% return.
FFA is selling their soul.
And I had a $250,000 mail budget, so it was crazy, yeah, and it was sad.
But why do organizations keep doing the mailers?
Because you have to keep filling your pipeline as best
Yeah.
you can with donors and hoping that you can move them up the ladder. So that is the thing about working that lower end. If you can take an expired or a FISBO, turn them into a great referral or sphere source, great,
Yeah,
you know?
it's, I think it all works.
Mm-hmm.
But this is kind of funny. Most of y'all know I'm involved in Habitat, and Habitat nationally has just recently started to get a bit of negative feedback from donors about how much money the organization is spending to raise money. You see how that's kind of parallel to a consumer saying to a realtor, wait, you spend half of your time trying to like build business? That's why you get paid so much money per hour with me, which is not really true, but that's a really good parallel. Any other feedback on this before I move on for get a little bit more specific? Okay. One of the things that I think is important about, so, and y'all know this isn't like there isn't just two categories here intentionally, right? I'm just setting this up as a spectrum to say it's not as if lead generation is personal or cold. So for example, mailers can be a very personal, I'll give you a couple examples of how a mailer can be a very personal thing, but for a moment, let's just say somewhere in there is the line, okay? What is our industry, so ignoring this for a second, what is our industry about? Or not sales, right? What is our industry about?
Relationship.
Yes. Is it about houses? No. If you're in the job because you love houses and you don't like working with people, how long are you gonna stick around in the job? Right? Not very long. The industry is about people, right? And so, this is why I love the industry, and I think it's why, if I am any good at it, that's why, because I enjoy working with people and building relationships. And what a cool job that we have, that building relationships can be the key to your business. If you haven't read a couple of these books, I would suggest this, write these down. Never Eat Alone. Have any of you read this?
I have.
Yeah.
It's good.
Like most books like it, it has a couple cheesy sections. It's probably not gonna win any, you know, author awards. But a highlight from this book, so the book is essentially about networking, okay? But one of the premises of the book is that the day the author became, and so he's looking back in hindsight, he's like kind of genius level networking, right? The day he now looks back on as the day he became really good at networking was the day he realized real networking was about finding ways to make other people more successful. There's just like a little snippet from Never Eat Alone that I'm gonna come back to this. What's the like underlying assumption there of what he used to think networking was?
Making
Themselves.
Yeah, right? Networking is about finding a way to make me more successful by interacting with these people. That's not a bad definition of networking. I think that's how most people view networking, correct? He said the day that it shifted for him was he changed his definition to, my goal here is to make any of the people I interact with more successful. You see there's risk to that. I wanna make a case that in all of these ways, sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, but sometimes when I see realtors invest time in these things, it's like an explicit call to make the realtor more successful. You see what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that's all bad. I'm not, there's no like moral or ethical statement here. I'm talking about just pragmatically, does it work from a networking perspective? Second book, I would suggest, we had a discussion on just this book last year. It's like the classic Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Terrible title, really cheesy book, but very good. And I think an important book in an industry like we're in. If you haven't read it, I would say do whatever it's going to take to read it. Buy the audio version. Highlight quote from that book: you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. You see the parallel between the quote from Never Eat Alone and How to Win Friends and Influence People. The key there is that you are focused. What does the other person want or need? What is true about them? Really good listening. Are realtors really good listeners, generally speaking? Probably not. They're good at talking, I think. So those, I'm sharing those two books as recommendations. When I'm at my best, that's the philosophy that I'm implying or applying. To be honest, like we're human beings. Who do we tend to think about most as human beings? Ourselves. Yes. If you don't know that yet, I promise you it's true of you. You think about yourself more than you think about any other person. So this is the discipline, right? Is to learn to think about the other person. What it like? It's a really cool business to be in. That this is good strategy in our business to think about the other person and to do it in this space. Okay. So what I want to spend about 15 minutes doing is talking about some specific examples in this space and how disciplining yourself on the front end as a realtor to wait for the long-term payoff will cause you to spend time in the right places. So this is, if I had one thing to say about developing sales in our industry, force yourself to be patient. If you're looking at what is the best way to spend my time for the 5-year run, that's the question. Is this worth my time or my money on the 5-year run? That's a pretty good filter. If the answer to that is yes, do it. My argument would be some of this is not. For some agents, some of this is just not worth it on the 5-year run. On the 30-day run, absolutely. So if that's the filter to apply, is does this pay off for me in the 5-year run? Okay. I'm gonna do a little exercise here. Everybody's gonna get a calendar. Take one and pass it around. Yes, thank you. Here's some. Who needs a cornerstone inspection?
My age doesn't change.
Oh, okay. We understand.
Males need one?
It doesn't change, it's just repeats the same year.
Cool. Okay.
You need pen?
I'm gonna make a case that as a realtor, if you are spending time with another person that lives in your community, it is impossible that you're wasting your time. Particularly if you're coming into this with the right mindset. We feel like this is work. You know, so like if you're buying Zillow leads, responding to them, or calling for sale founders, there's no doubt that that's work, and you get to check a box off, right? I worked today. You get up into here, is it work?
It's fun.
Can be.
Doesn't work.
It's, yeah. I would just say that if you're asking, am I working right now, you're kind of missing the point. Doesn't matter. That's not your, like, we don't have jobs like that. Michelle's question, is it working, is actually a pretty good one. That's one of the really cool things about our job, is that this can be very valuable, and particularly if you enjoy building relationships. If you're spending time with someone, building a relationship with them, you are not wasting time. Okay? And I want to give a couple examples of how money comes into play here. I'm just going to acknowledge that the further up this spectrum you go, the more you're talking about investing money. Is anybody made you feel a little bit uneasy by that?
About what?
Investment of money, investment of time, we know that both are invested down here. I think the more that you go up here, you think, oh, this is investment of time. You invest money too. So I think it's just a reality to acknowledge that, like, no, you are making a decision to spend money in a lot of these arenas. I think it could make some people feel a little bit uneasy because it's like, wait, am I actually friends with this person? So I think that's a worthwhile conversation, but just to point out, like, you are going to spend money in either one, so just make the decision intentional, okay? So what I want to do is an exercise. This is why you have a calendar in front of you. I found in about year 4 in the business that I had lost a bit of touch in developing business here, because I got to the point where, so like let's say in year 2, I didn't have to set a reminder to call a client that had bought a house 60 days ago, because I might have sold 12 houses that year. And so if that comes naturally to me, I would think to myself, I wonder, I think my very first client, I wonder how Mandy's doing in her house. I know she was having a problem with the furnace, I wonder how that turned out, I'm gonna call her. I didn't have to systematize that. That just kind of came naturally. And then what happens if your business grows? Well, that doesn't work. The organic nature of that relationship doesn't work. And it's not that she means any less to me as a friend or a person or a client, but all of a sudden I realized if I don't systematize this, or at least try to systematize this, it just won't happen. And I think sometimes people, in a similar way to like when you feel a little bit weird talking about spending money up here, maybe sometimes feel a little bit weird about systematizing this. Like, do I really have to set a reminder in my phone to text message someone who's a close friend of mine? But just spoil it for you, yes you do. Because eventually you're not going to do it if you don't set that reminder to text them. Does that make it feel a bit, forced or less organic, less real? I get that. But I would actually say intentionality on the front end is a way to prioritize people. You see what I'm saying there? That like you setting the reminder, like that person means something to me as a client. I'm setting a reminder right now to text them in 60 days. That reflects that they matter to you. It doesn't reflect the opposite. Do you follow me on that? So what the exercise here with your calendar, our team, if we do a good job of this, it's primarily Sarah, so she kind of runs this for our team, but we've built out a calendar where our goal is to maintain a real database of people. I'll explain what I mean by real. To maintain a real database of people that we touch a minimum of 12 times through the year. Okay? Real means we're willing to take somebody off of the list. This is not a list that is as big as it could be. Okay? You, in your own life and world, could define, like, what do I want that list to be? A friend of mine that's in Indianapolis that's in our business that does very, very well. He's been very successful in his career. I'm always impressed by how he does this. Twice a year, he'll go through his list and delete people, including like if they referred someone to another realtor. And it's not like I'm mad at them. It's, no, I want a list that I know I can invest really heavy in my relationship, in my time, and my money. And so I know that by taking that person off, you see that how he's given himself the freedom to do that, right?
How does he know if they refer somebody to another?
Probably social media. Yeah, yeah, I know, right? So maintain a real database. Comment here on CRM. It's funny, I see this arc of realtors. I'm not suggesting you should not use a CRM. I think a CRM can be a very helpful tool. My experience now says that realtors go on this like bell curve of how long they've been in the industry and how likely they are to use a CRM, or at least to use it in a really significant way. Early on, I don't think people understand the value of the network, so they're not as likely to use one. Then they get really busy, they understand networks to be very valuable, and they say, I really need to invest in a CRM. What happens later in the career? That if I'm making the argument that they use it less often, what happens that causes that?
Business comes easier.
Business comes easier.
That's all, just more repeat referrals.
Yeah, and the way that I would describe this is I think you realize the nature of a high margin, low transaction count business. You don't have to be in front of thousands of people. And if you are in front of thousands of people, you don't have a competitive advantage with thousands of people. You just really don't. Whether it's neighborhood expertise, community alignment or engagement, you know them personally or you know someone that knows them. There's a limited number of people that you have a real defined competitive advantage with. And so this isn't to say don't use the CRM, but I ask a lot of people in our industry this, and here's what I find. There's a lot of $20 million plus individuals or teams that are using an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet for this. And so if that's what you're using, don't think that you're missing out on something. Now, a CRM can be a really good tool. Just if you're looking at that as the solution, particularly up in this side of the spectrum, I think maybe you missed something. So I would just say how you maintain that database is up to you. But I mean, the friend that I was referencing, he works really hard to maintain his at 300. He's been in the business for 15 years and has had a year where he sold $25 million in real estate. And his list is at 300. If it gets over 300, he tries to cut it down. Now, that's not gonna work for everybody. He's very, very good at this. But you see my point. You don't need a CRM to deal with 300 people. So go Microsoft Excel.
Mark, everybody's on Google Docs and stuff.
I know, I know. Did Rosie plant that comment?
No, it's just a living, breathing document.
I know.
Accessible across your mobile device.
You know, an Excel sheet can be living too.
On one
I don't think so.
device.
Yeah. Google didn't exist when I started learning how to use Microsoft Excel.
It's the same thing, it's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
you get it.
Okay, so I wanna give you, some examples, and then my goal is that you spend at least a couple minutes, maybe here, or maybe just at some point today, force yourself to create the calendar, right? So again, this isn't to try to make your relationships systems, but this is, if they matter to you, I can guarantee you that you'll be better at them if you're working intentionally on the front end about them, and a calendar is part of how you do this. Okay, so we try to put them in these categories. Actually, here, look at this. So what we try to do is lay out a calendar at the beginning of the year that says, at a minimum, anyone that's on this list, so the first part is the list. You have to make the list, you have to filter the list, make sure it's the right list, okay? So these are people that you have some direct connection to. If they're a past client, oh my gosh, absolutely, they should be on the list. But this is also just someone that you know well who could be an advocate for your business. And don't worry, I'm never going to suggest that you need to explicitly ask them to advocate for your business. That's not the point. Read those 2 books. But we want them to somehow be connected to a large event. So this is something where it's probably not super personal, but it's still a in-person connection, and it's scalable. So like our team does one of these a year. Medium event would be like a 10 to 15 person thing. You invite people out to dinner, to your house to dinner. Several of my teammates last year, we hired this really cool catering company called Fork and Function that'll come to your house and do like kind of a fancy meal, or maybe not fancy. And those were between probably 10 and 30 people. Shared experience is more of a one-on-one, or maybe 1-on-2 or 1-on-3. So this is like, for me, this would be going to a Pacers game or playing golf. It's because I love sports. But those are really fun. That might be the most valuable thing I do in the whole year. Like honestly, it just is. Whatever that shared experience is for you. And so these can be really fun. For my personality type, they're really fun. For you, they might be really hard. But this is how you will make yourself do it, right? I think they should be receiving at least one a year in each of these categories. I'm gonna put here, so we do, I don't wanna understate the value of this. If a former client sees their phone ringing and it's you, depending on your relationship with them, and you have no agenda to the call other than just to see how they're doing, how's the neighborhood going? What have you loved about your house? Like y'all see the value in that. A lot of times clients are like, wait, how's it?
Sorry, I'm curious, if you get on that phone call and the house isn't going well, and the neighborhood isn't great, like, I mean, my default.
Definitely hang up right away.
Yeah. My default reaction, would just be to listen and empathize. Is there anything else that you think of that would be helpful in that conversation for them?
So here's one of those ones where when it's not me in that moment, it's easier to say this. anytime your client has something go wrong in the middle of a transaction, or is frustrated by something after the transaction, this is not just sales pitch. That is your best opportunity to win that person into a lifetime advocate. 100%. How you respond will define whether they view you as their go-to person. And I'm not saying it's like, oh, great, here's the, like, I'm glad that they're experiencing this negative thing so that I could win them over. No, you're not rooting for people to do that, but that's how you need to view that. So in this case, my first thought, well, hopefully, is, oh man, I'm really glad I called them. Because I would have known this otherwise. Not, oh, well, this is awkward. But okay, I'm really glad I know that. And now I'm gonna invest time by listening and try to, if there's a solution, try to offer it, or maybe just listen, be empathetic, find a way to identify with them. I think those are your best opportunities to demonstrate, like, this wasn't a transaction. Just like dealing with the hard part of the transaction demonstrates it wasn't just a transaction to you. Totally scalable, not hard to do, but when your list gets fairly long, you're just not going to do it. I mean, we've taken times in our team meetings where we just kind of shut the meeting down and everybody has a list in front of them and they're going through texting. They go through a list of 20 or whatever to send a text about something, and right, that's not how text is normally used. And I'm not suggesting you're sending like a text to 20 people, not like a group text message. And there's, right, so there's CRMs that can automate stuff like this. And I would just say like, hey, if that works for you, great. But I think people are intimidated by trying to do that sort of automation to this. Systematize it by saying like, no, that's what I do in March. And I blocked out 2 days in March. I'm gonna take 2 hours and 2 days in March. I guarantee you that's worth your time. But you won't do it, if you see what I'm saying. Couple different ways that this can be effective. This was not my idea, so I will brag on how great it turned out. So our whole list in December, I think early December, we mailed them a postcard that had a redeemable code on it for Pots and Pans, the pie place that's on College Avenue. Kelly's not here, it's in Sobro. It's on video, Kelly's gonna see that. So we sent this to like 700 people, and so we didn't have to pay for the pie unless they got online and ordered it. But then if they got online and ordered it, they just billed it to us and they went and picked it up. And it was, I mean, Sarah made the card like really cute, and the number of texts that I got when people got the card, or when they went to pick up the pie, or when they were eating the pie. I mean, I think I probably got 30.
How many pies did you have to pay for?
I think we ended up buying a little over 300.
Wow.
Yep. Now that's over a long list of people. Money. But if you give me that return over 5 years, it's not even close in terms of the return on the dollar. And I would rather buy my friend a pie, to be honest. Even if it doesn't return, like, okay, fine, I bought somebody a pie that they ate, like, so I'm not suggesting you need to do these same things, but an example of how that was scalable to a group of 700 people. It was just intentionality at a certain time of year, worked into a calendar, and you were willing to invest some money to do it. Crystal, actually, I promise we came up with these ideas independently. She goes and buys a bunch of pies and brought them in and set them up here in stacks and carved out like 3 hours on a particular night. I think maybe she did this 2 nights, and told her clients, hey, come by between 4 and 7 on Monday or Tuesday to the office. And people were coming in and picking up their like Thanksgiving pies. So she added in she got to see them face to face, which I thought was great.
Ellie does the same thing with pies and cheese balls.
Yeah.
In her office.
Here's the example of the I mean, before you were realtors, some of you may have ended up on a realtor email drip campaign. I think, thank God, these are less common now than they used to be. So your email just ends up on the list and you get the Lowe's generated spring homeowner tips. If you've sent one of those, I don't mean to offend you. But I think this can be an effective tool. For example, something like this. Just a quick reminder, hey, if you need to file your homestead exemption, just a reminder you need to do that by the end of the year. Or something that we tried this year, and I bet this was challenging, was to try to divide your list up into maybe neighborhoods or life stages or something like that, to where I pushed each of our team to come up with some sort of real estate related information that this specific person would find valuable, and then email or text it to them. So a couple of my team members do a lot of business in one particular neighborhood. So they ran numbers in that neighborhood, here's how many houses sold, here's what they sold for, here's the year-over-year price increase, and oh, by the way, you've probably heard about this restaurant that's coming at the corner down the street from you. They put that into an email and send it individually out to a group of people. And I think that's really good content, especially if it's going to someone that you know, because then they're thinking oh, it's a great reminder of what you do. And it's, who is that email about? Primarily, who is it about? Them. I thought you would probably find this interesting, and most people do. They want to know what's going on in their neighborhood. That requires a decent amount of work, particularly as your list grows, but worth the time. We did a similar thing to where we, in the spring, we sent postcards that were highlighting a business that the realtor really liked in their neighborhood. So hey, this is one of my favorite spots in this part of the city. It's one of the reasons I love this part of the city. And it was a redeemable coupon for $15 or $20 there. So Kingdo, I think Jenny was one that you did, right?
Greeks.
Yeah. Right, Greeks. Jenny's daughter was working there at the time. I think it's around the corner from her house. She loves it. They agreed to let us do a redeemable code, so you're not spending the money for a postcard to get thrown away. So it's a value to them. It reminds them of the neighborhood connection. So these are just ideas, but I think and there's nothing magic about 12, but that's our goal, is that in some way they're getting a contact, some form of touch 12 times. If they get invited to this event and don't come, we're counting that as that we'd rather them come, but they still got the contact, right? So I think take the calendar, hopefully having an actual physical calendar might help you discipline yourself to do this, but carve out some time in each month of the year, and then make sure it's a diverse, some of them are time intense, some of them take a little bit more money, some of them are more personal, some of them not. Make a diversity of how you're touching that person. So you have to have the list, you have to spread it out over the year and schedule it and force yourself to do it. And I think somewhere in that neighborhood of 10 or 12 touches a year. What this does, it allows you to leverage spending time here on this side of the spectrum. And I think in the long run, again, on that 5-year run, it's going to be difficult to measure, but you know it when you see it, right? You can't, it's not quite as quantifiable as doing these things. But that annual, so if you maintain a good list and force yourself to 10 touch points that are of value to that person, that's not complex. It's not easy, but maintaining a good list and having a touch point 10 times that's valuable to them will pay off very, very well. And I would, if you haven't read those books, I think kind of forcing yourself to this system and stretching your like philosophy of relationships and how they play in the business by reading those books. And there's hundreds of others, I'm sure. They're very good as well. Lots of stuff in here that we didn't get to, but I'm kind of talking about like that section of this spectrum, which is where I think the highest return is. It's where realtors generally suck. And those that are good there have the most predictable, successful businesses. And I haven't even mentioned this, but we'll finish with this. Where on that spectrum is the most enjoyable lead to work with? This is top. So we're not even talking about like business outcome in terms of income, but just quality of life and how much do you enjoy your job. I think most people would say, when you're down here, how willing is this person to waste your time? How likely are they to be like really rude? They don't know you. You're not a person to them. Like you barely are. And so you have to be, again, it can work, but I see people doing that and really getting frustrated by it. And they say, oh, lead generation's a waste of time. Well, maybe if your expectations were correct, you would have spent more time up here. Cool. Yes.
Can you talk about, like, if you've got people that maybe you had a great relationship with, but now it's been a couple of years. And now to be like, hey, come to a ball game with me is weird, frankly. Is there a softball way to kind of get back?
It's a good illustration to use there.
I don't know, I think that's where I struggle, is that like I've got my top people that are easy to do a lot of this, but then the sort of medium people that right now if I call them they'd be like, what do you want, you know? Do you have any suggestions?
Selling something. This is gonna be a
Oh, great.
I mean, I think somewhere in here, if you haven't connected with them for a while, where it's just them, and you're like in total control of the narrative of the conversation. I mean, I also think you could just acknowledge, like, hey, it's been too long. I can't believe it's been 2.5 years since, just to make fun of myself about this. Like very close friends of mine, I was doing a home anniversary card. So we systematize this every year. They'll get a handwritten, like, congratulations, happy birthday to your house, whatever. I wrote something like, I can't believe it's been 5 years. And they texted me a picture of the card and they're like, that's because it's been 6. Yeah. Now, there are people that I've been in touch with pretty regularly. So I think they knew that was just whatever.
Right.
But I think you can just acknowledge that you haven't talked to them in a while and try to connect with them for lunch. Again, you don't have to do business this way, but if you're a realtor and you can get across this, the never get alone. Like if you can get across the table from someone for coffee or for breakfast or lunch or whatever, I guarantee you it's not a waste of your time. It may not always be the best use of your time. So that'd be how I would do it.
Okay, I'm gonna cut off all questions because the Clayton team has their meeting in here. Thank you for coming. Tomorrow we have Will Jones from MJW, who's a lender, who's gonna come in and chat with us. So hope you can make it. Happy birthday, Diane.
Yeah, happy
Yay.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Sorry to make you clear it out.
Okay, Clayton team, you guys are rocking it.
Yeah.
We're hashtag. You did anything fun for your birthday? I've not been there yet.
Yeah, it's like,
I'm gonna get a gift card today.
oh, yeah, I'm excited.
It's brand new.
Yeah.
It's brand new.
Where is it? 46th.
Oh, okay, oh, is it right? Is it across, is it right
Yeah.
across from the brewery?
It's right across from us. What else that name?
Next to
Oh, I was next door for 10 years, I forgot how much I liked that one.
Yeah, that'll be good. It's got really good reviews, service is good.
Oh, God.